So first of all, thank you very much for coming along to this session. We've got some good work and some discussions for you. So, it's great to have people in the room, isn't it? So my name's Anita Banerji. I work for the Software Sustainability Institute, the SSI. I was an RSE in medical imaging. That has been the majority of my research career. But I've now moved over to looking at equitable careers in RSE, or computational research, with the support of social scientists. And one of those social scientists is Jasmine, who's going to be presenting some of our research work today. We also have Pauline and Ella, who are part of the RSE community and a part of this project from a professional and lived experience point of view. And then we have Oscar over here, who runs the SSI Fellowship Programme and will be sharing some learnings on inclusivity around that. So we're first going to do an activity around the social history of computing. Now, this is kind of new to me. It's around legislation. It's around the people involved in computing and the social history of that. Don't worry if that all sounds a bit either boring or unfamiliar. We've got an exercise for you to engage with around that. Then we're going to look at some learnings from the RSE project and your response to that to get community feedback to what we're doing. Then we're going to look at some practical actions from the SSI Fellowship Programme, and finally an activity for improving inclusivity in your institute, and that's a scenario-based group discussion activity. So there's a bit of a mix there. So first of all, we'll have a code of conduct for this conference, but it's nice to just sort of get a feel of the nuances of that within a space such as this. These have come from me, and I suppose I was just trying to explore, what does a space for building allyship essentially look like? So it involves acknowledging that inequality exists, and that people have different levels of lived and learned experience. We want to open space for learning, for building allyship, but we also want to respectfully challenge any sort of views that, well, often they're society's views coming through us. So it's a space to sort of almost look at some of society's views rather than the individuals, if you like. We want to make a space for all voices without placing a burden on people to have to explain their lived experiences. You might, if we could have co-produced this, and you might have used more nuanced ones, so you might have other ones that are important to you, but these are some that I thought we could start with. So, to your first activity, funny because when I'm in a workshop and somebody says something like that, I'm like, oh no, not this bit. But I actually, So it's the give them out for two people to work at them together if that fits. So, firstly, to the online people, we got people online, Oscar. Yeah. So Oscar's going to share with you a document of documents. And in that, you'll be put in your breakout rooms, and then you'll see a document that relates to your breakout room number. And you can click on that. So that's fine. Breakout rooms are 2, 3. And then I think you know what you're doing in the room. Don't you? It's quite obvious. You're sliding the bits and pieces around to try and match the years. Just a little warning about Alan Turing, and so there is a little warning that it does have a mention of suicide. I've already done it. So first of all, sexuality. So we had Alan Turing publishing his paper. And then he designed the British bombs that he used in cryptography in World War II. So here we see Alan Turing, who was a gay man, thriving. Often that's not the case because being gay was legal at the time. So why does he thrive? There is some thought that within King's College, Cambridge, where he was, there was an elite gay circle where he could be openly gay. So he wasn't, suffering from the implications of not being able to be his full self. In 1952, he was prosecuted for homosexual acts. Again, it's just an article in The Guardian that talks about how he actually told the police he was gay, not realising the consequences of that. And then 2 years later, he died by suicide. There's some questioning, some doubt around that, but we know very broadly that if you are persecuted, if you are discriminated, there is a severe impact on your mental health, your ability to thrive, and I suppose this could be the most extreme example of that. I think it's nice to situate ourselves where we are. So it's just to see, you know, we're a physical presence in the world, we're an embodied presence in the world, where that fits. So I've seen a version of this done where you also look at where you were born and where your parents were, when your parents or your carers were, when carers were born. So you can see how this played out through generational timescales, how things change. Yeah, so we have the Sexual Offences Act, Section 28 came in, which really restricted what schools could do in terms of talking about homosexual same-sex relationships. A year after that, the first implementation of Python was started. So they wouldn't have been teaching Python in school at the time. They might have been teaching BASIC. But again, you're getting that compression of people. What would it be like to be a young coder at that time when this sort of atmosphere was being created in the school where you could be open about your sexuality? Finally, 2010, the Equality Act, there were some legislation before that, but this is what brought together all the 9 protected characteristics to give them equality in the workplace, to be treated equally within the workspace without discrimination. And then the RSE term was coined. So it's just interesting to see how you know, the RSE community history fits into this. And then finally, 2017, the Alan Turing law. So I've also just put in some of the activism, social justice movements, civil rights movements. Any progress that's made isn't necessarily because the government sort of looks at what they think is best for different groups of people. It's advocated for. So it's interesting to think as a group what we want to advocate for. We have the gender one. So what's interesting here is I named Alan Turing, didn't I? A great man, a great mathematician, a cryptographer, his contribution to society during the war, reducing the length of the war, they think, reducing the lives lost. The Women's Royal Naval Services, slightly pejoratively termed the Reds, they've not been named, have they? They're these nameless, interchangeable females doing the work behind the scenes, doing the computation behind the scenes. So it's not just the work that women are allowed to do, it's how they're then represented in history. And we're going to try and right that historical wrong in a moment. But one could ask, were the Wrens the first RSEs? Was Alan Turing an academic? And were the Wrens the ones that were doing the computation, the programming behind the scenes, doing a lot more than they were credited for? Here we have the marriage bar being repealed in government. Women used to have to leave their jobs when they got married. Sometimes there is legislative change, but it takes a long time for that practice to actually come into play. Which you can see here, the National Equal Pay Act comes into force, but the UK was pulled up for it in 1983. And if we jump back to this one, machine grades. So these are the computation machines. Grades were created for women in the civil service. These were seen as low grade, low skilled, devalued jobs. They weren't included in the Equal Pay Act because there was no men's grade. So they were kept on low grade. They were not given training because it wasn't worth investing in them. They weren't given pensions. There was no promotion. And in this great book that Jasmine pointed me to by Ma Hicks, they describe how discarding the women within the technology route within the UK actually led to the UK losing its edge. So it's interesting then to see we've come from potentially all women RSE to 20%. So, you know, how did that happen? How did that become masculinized? We've got a little hint of it there within more public sector commercial context, but there's also an academic context that we haven't gone into here. And you might kind of, you know, sort of think about history and think about the relevance of how that plays through to society. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an engaging exercise into the social history of computing. So yeah, I mentioned already that Alan Turing is often named, but there were other people, other mathematicians and a female cryptographer as well. But also this 10,000 strong workforce at Bletchley Park, where the code breaking was done during World War II. Not all of them were sort of in computation. But I thought it would be nice to right that historical wrong and actually see some of the names of those women. And any of you that have a connection to a white British Western background will recognize these kind of names from that generation. You know, the Peggies, the Hildas, the Margarets, my mum's the Margarets, the Jones. We know the names of the women in that reputation and how we maybe view them and the potential they could have had. So it's rather nice to put their names up on the screen. Who wasn't supported to contribute? Even the women that contributed will have had privilege, so class privilege, for example. So, and there's some interesting information on computing her story there. And so further reflections, we're not going to discuss them today, but it's nice to think who are the social justice groups that advocated for legislative change, whether those were unions, whether they were staff associations, whether they were civil rights justice movements, and how we want to work as a community. And how are current technology innovations changing social structure? So Mara Hicks talks about this with a group with the initial computer hardware and software. And what's coming along now, there's a big AI session going on at the moment. So how is that actually going to interact with social inequalities and social inequalities within RSE? And also, how are contemporary political events influencing opportunities in tech at RSE? If you talk to any of our international colleagues, and we have some here today, they may well tell you about the changing visa requirements and how that's impacting on their ability to engage with RSE in the UK. So there will be other things there, and I'm sure you would have things that you would bring to the table, but I'm almost putting those out there as reflections rather than us going to be talking about them today. Was there anything that particularly surprised you from doing these exercises? Anything that interested you?
Do you know where the bar of the 1946? The next one. The marriage bar repeal, was that as a product of the war? That there were not enough women working and they needed to have them working, or was actually thinking on women should work?
I kind of looked with confidence from our social scientists, but I think from what I've read, like I said, this is a new area I'm stepping into, that women had to step into different kinds of roles during the war because the men were away fighting. So firstly, there were new roles that were created during that time that, and then, yeah, it was a change in society, wasn't it, after the war? Would you add to that, Jasmine?
Yeah, I would. I can't speak to the UK specifically, but in the US, that was certainly the case. And then when the war ended, women got pushed back into the home.
Anything else that surprised you or interested you? I'm not saying I have answers, but it's just an interesting thing in the room. What interested you? Or anything from online? Anything that surprised you about the dates? I think you found more difficult to put in order. Okay. Yeah, well, just some room for discussion if you wanted it, but that's fine if you're happy at your discussions. In that case, I'll hand over to Jasmine.
Hey, everyone. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to put this here because I know I have a timer, but then I also like to time myself because sometimes
Do you want the clicker, Jasmine?
I would love the clicker. Can you just tell me how to, when I click?
It's that.
This one? Perfect. Okay, great. All right. My name is Jasmine Folz. My background is in social anthropology. I have spent the last 2 decades specializing in studying high-tech workers. So people like you are the people that I've been researching with. I've done research in the United States in Seattle about outsourcing and kind of the ways in which outsourcing has been problematized by high-tech workers in the United States. I did my PhD research in India with free and open source software activists. And I've also done research on the coding community at the University of Manchester before joining the Inclusive RSE research project. So this is an area that I have a lot of experience with, but RSE has been new to me, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm just going to briefly discuss what the project has done more recently, in the past, more recently, and what the plans for the future are, as well as share some of the findings that we've had in the interviews that we conducted this year with RSCs. All right, so far 3 phases have been completed. Phase 1 focused on developing co-production. Hold your questions, I'll get to that in a second. Phase 2 is a series of workshops to develop interview guides. Phase 3, which we just completed, was conducting a pilot study of interviews with RSCs who have marginalized identities. So each phase of the project has foregrounded co-production practices, which allows us to meaningfully weave in lived experiences of RSCs with professional expertise and research methodology. So co-production, lived experience. We folded these because these are really important to us in the project, but they might be new terms to you. So these come out as a response to some traditional research, which has been very extractive, where a researcher comes in and says, okay, I want to understand this phenomenon, I want to understand this community, I'm going to do a survey and interview, and I'm going to collect all this data, and then I'm going to analyze it and publish it, and my career will go great. So that can be a little bit extractive in a couple of ways. One, the researchers coming in, taking from the participants or the community, hopefully with consent, in the past, not always, and then using that to benefit themselves without sometimes, and in some cases, it's been to the detriment of the people that were researched. So this idea of co-production is an explicit acknowledgement of the fact that research is always co-produced. It's always, there's a researcher, and then there's people that are also being engaged with for the research. Now, in social sciences especially, this is the case, because we're talking to people either through a survey or interviews of focus groups or ethnography, and we wouldn't have the research without you. And so co-production is an attempt to explicitly include participants within the process by recognizing lived experience as just as valid as expert knowledge. And so, for example, for this project, okay, I'm an anthropologist. I've been studying high-tech workers for a long time. So I do know a lot about what other people have said and my own research. But I'm not a high-tech worker. And I won't ever really fully understand some aspects of it because of that. But because there are RSCs who are on this team, who are guiding the way that the research is being developed and analyzed, that's actually going to, one, recognize the fact that it's important to design and analyze research with the community in mind, but it's also going to make for better analysis. All right, I've probably gone on too far, but also this is just a list of people past and present who have been involved in the project. All right, so as you know, as Anita just pointed out in the timeline, RSE is an emerging professional identity. And our interviewees really are proud and happy to be RSEs. Oh, sorry, one quick note, I forget, if there's anyone in the room today who participated in our research, please don't identify yourself. We're trying to protect everyone's confidentiality. I forgot to say that, so just FYI. But these are, I'm going to be using some quotes from the interviews that we did with RSEs this spring. And these just kind of demonstrate a couple of things. One, that this is a career path that people would find meaningful, in part because people who are doing RSE work could probably easily, or maybe not easily, but they could also go into industry, perhaps more easily than someone who studies history or something like that. But they're choosing to work in RSE roles often because they are interested in kind of maintaining a bit of that academic connection, as well as wanting to do work that they feel might have a wider societal benefit. And so RSE is really great for people with those goals. All right, so I'm going to leave this quote up for a little bit. I want you guys to read it, think about it, and then we'll discuss what the implications are for our research findings. All right, so experiences of discrimination are common for people with marginalized identities, and this is something that we definitely found in our interviews. All the interviewees have experienced subtle or overt discrimination. Now, the quote that I just started with was a form of subtle discrimination, but it's one that really does impact people who have to experience this again and again, that because of their identity, people are surprised that they could be a professional in the way that they are. So reasons for discrimination cited by our interviewees, of course, include gender identity, race, neurodivergence, social class. These are just the reasons for discrimination that came out of the interviews we conducted. There are obviously many more. Experiences of discrimination have shaped the way the interviewees feel about their professional identity, I think, in very profound ways. And this includes feeling like an imposter, feeling that they're not able to fully be their authentic selves at work within their professional environment, and worrying about being perceived as a diversity hire. If you haven't ever experienced these feelings, I would like you to just kind of consider how detrimental this would be to your professional identity to have to question, on top of just the regular anxieties we all have about our professional work and wanting to do well and advance in our careers, to have this layer on top of that. Some more quotes about some answers we got when we asked people about when they applied for their RSE roles. All right, so in a way that's not surprising. People apply for jobs because they need a job. Okay. However, I think that what came out of the interviews, and something that perhaps wasn't surprising to me and may not be surprising to people in this room, I'm not sure, is that precarity in UK higher education has really shaped our interviewees' careers, as well as, I think, the role of RSE in general within the political economy of the United Kingdom. At least, I can't speak outside of. But there has been an increasing scarcity of permanent higher education jobs, and this has caused our interviewees to cast much wider nets in their job searches than they might have outside of their disciplinary specialty. The beauty of RSE is that because they've picked up a lot of software engineering abilities during their education, they're able to apply those outside of perhaps their specialty. So we have people who specialized in physics who were then doing stuff in chemistry and this and that. A little bit of that has always happened. But if we look at the data in the United Kingdom in the past 25 years, the decrease in permanent positions and the ways that has affected academic career trajectories is really apparent here. All right, so it impacts how they form their professional identity and their ability to settle down, plan for the future. So, you know, if someone wants to do postgraduate work or a PhD, it is often because they are very passionate about whatever it is that they're doing. And so that's a big part of your identity, is I'm investing a lot of time and energy in this very difficult degree program. And the hope is that you'll get a more fulfilling career out of it. And that's often not the case, increasingly so, unfortunately. However, RSE has kind of provided a stopgap for that has provided an avenue where people can still, maybe it's not exactly what they always thought it would be. And this might change. As RSE grows, it might become that people are actually going into education thinking specifically about becoming RSEs, but that wasn't the case for the people that we interviewed. So it's just very interesting to kind of think about how this identity of RSE, which they've all embraced, kind of wasn't what they planned on at the beginning. And that's because of the precarity in the education system. All right, here's some more quotes. All right, so everyone that we talked to, as we already discussed, has felt they all have marginalized identities in one or more ways, and they've all felt discriminated against at different points in their education or careers. So for them, the people that we interviewed, it's very important to them when they're looking for RSE roles going forward. And everyone that we interviewed does want to continue in the RSE track, that the people, the organizations that they work with respect diversity and inclusion. So that's something that's really important to think about going forward. And so it is really important to think going forward, what can this emergent RSE profession do to overcome the often toxic nature and our culture in STEM. And by toxic, what I mean here is that it's an unhealthy environment. That STEM culture in education and careers, and this is not just me saying it, there's been a lot of empirical research that shows people with marginalized identities often feel discriminated against. They have all of these additional layers of not feeling welcome or able to be themselves within their professional careers. And then that can be, you know, unhealthy for your mental health, and your mental health, of course, is also tied to your physical health, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I mean when I'm saying that it's a toxic culture, that the environment itself can be, not always, can be toxic. So RSE as an emergent profession, what can we do to mitigate that? So next steps for this project. So phase 3, obviously, we produced, I think, some really important data, which kind of extends and amplifies a lot of research into identity in STEM already. And going forward, we have phase 4, which is starting now, where we're going to conduct some more interviews. And we're also going to work on disseminating some findings, as well as recruiting some social science PGRs to help with the next 2 phases. So phase 5 is where we're going to develop a national survey, a representative survey, to better understand how UK RSEs understand and experience their identity, as well as an interview guide to conduct with RSE leaders, more senior people who can actually perhaps implement policies. So yeah, there we're going to analyze it, right, disseminate, and then the final kind of research action is going to be conducting research with policymakers and RSE leaders that can actually lead to shifted policies to improve the experiences of RSEs with marginalized identities. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to hand it over to Ella.
Thank you, Jasmine. You did that up really well. The next phase part of this workshop is going to be a 20-minute facilitated discussion. It's really great for us as an inclusive RSE project team to engage the wider community in the research that we're doing, and also gather your thoughts and your experiences to get the community response to our work. It's not formally part of our research. You know, the things that you say or things like here aren't going to appear in a paper or anything, but it will help us refine our approach and our methodology in the future phases of the project. So we have about 20 minutes, and on the left of the slide I've got the headlines, just to remind you of our findings as Jasmine presented, and on the right, 3 reflection questions. They're extremely broad. We're happy for you to take this discussion wherever it goes for you, but we'd like to think of what, if anything, are you surprised by and what we've presented so far? Conversely, what, if anything, is familiar to you? And what else do you want to know? Are there any questions that have come up in your mind as we think about it? So we have about 20 minutes. I think I've spent about a couple of minutes setting the scene. So if we do, say, 12 minutes around the tables of group discussion. You can answer any or all of these questions in any order that you wish. And if you could jot down some notes just to help you keep track of your thoughts and that we can collect afterwards, but also to facilitate a reporting back, because after the table discussions would be really lovely to have a whole room discussion. So we'll have about 12 minutes on the table, about 7 minutes back. It interrupts a really good discussion. It's so nice to see people talking on the table. I know on our table that these were just like the looser springboards into more general discussion. So wherever this conversation, wherever these prompts took you, if it's not specific answers to these questions, that doesn't matter at all. It's got you talking about these general themes. So we've got about 5 minutes left for this part of the workshop, and I would love to go around and maybe for about 5 minutes. What's that out for you on your table?
I'm not sure what we could summarize. I think that one of the things that we found that was potentially interesting was 2 of us have undergrad backgrounds in physics. We found that significantly more equal than the people with undergrad backgrounds in computer science. And we were just wondering, like, both of them are seen as traditionally male, even though in computer science, to go further back, it is actually traditionally female. But like, why they were so different, like at similar times. We don't have an answer.
What we aren't solving this problem right here, right now. No. Thank you very much. On this thing.
Right, so I think mostly the most part was the requirements for international applicants, that they are not being considered by the recruiters, and then also how we look at the maybe the RSE recruitment is already happened when the whole number of people have been reduced, because have been reduced by different layers before they get to the RSE recruitment. And yeah, more realistic job descriptions. Sometimes they ask for the movement, and they only need like a number of staff or skills. Yeah, and at the end we got like kind of whether the religion identity has been part of the questions of diversity. That's all. Accessibility and other ones has been posed as a question, but that might be part of the accessibility, the diversity question or purpose.
Thank you. And finally, on the table, we've got an online as well. Oh, yes. Sorry, thank you. This table and then online. Thanks.
So I reflected that our team feels very inclusive, and I think that's in part led by management that a skilled first aid, mental health first aid is interested in general improving flexible working and making people be able to partake in work where maybe they might not have been able to before. And personally, for me, having job descriptions that are like an open invitation, we will welcome part-time applications rather than full-time only. Don't get in contact otherwise. So we didn't necessarily ask these questions, but a lot of it was, how do you have an inclusive workspace?
Stemming from the question of what is familiar.
Right, familiar, yeah.
Oscar, do you want to report back from?
Yeah, I'll report back. I think we discussed many of the things that are mentioned already. One of the things, in addition to sort of backgrounds as well, is that we mentioned some people online and myself have a background in arts and humanities, where there's different challenges in terms of discrimination, different challenges, issues, and moving between these disciplines and backgrounds to computer science roles, things that can then change that perspective quite a lot. And then we also talked a little bit about some the issue that was raised about between equality and equity, basically. So there's this question of, people are not getting the same opportunities, not access to the same opportunities, and how do you go about mitigating that, and what are sort of the legal limits of how you can do that, and what are the practical limits around that as well, and what are some of the best ways of doing that.
Thank you very much. I think that takes us pretty much back on time. Oscar, over to you to talk about the SSI.
Yes.
You can answer some of the questions you just posed.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Oscar. I'm the Research Community Manager at the SSI, and I run the fellowship program. Quick plug, it is open for applications until the 6th of October. So if you are thinking about applying, come talk to me. There's lots of information on our website as well. But in the last year, I've really been following the Inclusive RSE project and the team very closely. So I'm not officially affiliated. It's sort of informal, mostly through lots of coffees with Anita and other people. But I very closely follow sort of the outcomes and the progress of the project. And we are on an informal basis are sort of trying out things in practice and theory and learning from each other in this journey. So what I want to present here today is sort of 5 lessons from the last year of trying some things out in practice about trying to improve the diversity fellowship program. I should mention that I'm relatively new to running the fellowship program, so I've done it once and we're doing the second time again, so it is still very much an ongoing process. But we have some things I hope will people find interesting. So the first point, language matters. I think that was the first thing that we started with, and language plays an important role whether people feel welcome to apply, and even small changes often can make a meaningful difference. One of the things that we did is review our selection criteria and our website, working both with fellows and colleagues, such as Anita and the team, to make sure that the language we use reflects the values of our community, rather than unintentionally discouraging applicants, particularly those from underrepresented groups. One concrete change that we did to our selection criteria, moving from describing applications as poor, which feels sort of final and negative, to not ready this time. This communicates both the applicant and the reviewer that the door remains open to try again in the future, and that there are opportunities for support and growth. The shifts just more broadly emphasizes our focus on growth over perfection. So you don't have to have the skills, you can grow into that, which we see also affects people in terms of genders applying for these roles. In other words, we want to highlight that training and support are available throughout the fellowship, and that applicants do not need to have all the skills, knowledge, or status when they apply. And as I mentioned, it's particularly relevant for women, as studies have shown that they are more likely to self-exclude if they meet every criteria, whereas men are more likely inclined to apply even if they only meet part of the requirements. And finally, one of the other things we did is pay attention to specific terminology. For example, researcher versus scholar, to make sure our language is inclusive of a broad range of career stages and backgrounds, including those from non-traditional, non-academic, non-STEM backgrounds. And these very small things can often make an important difference. The other thing, measure before you act. The point there is that measuring gives us knowledge and gives us the knowledge to make meaningful change. Without data, it's all too easy to act on assumptions about who is applying, who is being selected, and why. And those assumptions may come from a good place, but they can still be wrong in some cases, and well-intentioned actions may have the opposite effect to what you're hoping to achieve. By collecting and analyzing data, we were able to identify gaps in the fellowship program and set realistic targets for outreach. We could also then monitor our progress over time and be transparent in sharing those successes and areas where more work is needed. And this evidence-based approach allows us to understand the true picture of diversity in the fellowship program rather than relying on impressions or anecdotal evidence. And here you can see some of the gender representation within the fellowship program. So measuring is not simply about numbers, it's about creating the foundation for better decision making and more effective interventions, as well as ultimately a more inclusive fellowship community. In practice, it meant that we were reaching out in our promotion to underrepresented groups that we identified in our fellowship program. Now, the next part is be transparent and be honest about remaining issues. Transparency is a very important part of building trust, and for us this is meant to be honest about the challenges that remain, as well as open about the progress that we've made to both our community and ourselves. By acknowledging where we still have work to do, we create space for dialogue and invite others to be part of shaping the solution. And what you see here is sort of ethnicity, and this is the selected fellows, and we see during the selection process that diversity actually decreases. So we are going to, very happy next year, we're going to work with external partners to review our selection processes as well, to see where we can make some improvements. So even though this is by measuring important, we focus a lot on diversity, but actually you can see that in selected fellows, diversity decreased in the last cohort. So it's also good to, yeah, be good at itself. One of the things of transparency is that we made selection criteria and process openly available on our website. So we put everything we put on our website. That is useful for people who don't have access to the networks about the selection process, who have that tacit sort of hidden knowledge, and people often also from who are neurodivergent. They can really prepare about all the criteria and how the selection process and some of our selection days, what is actually going to happen, what the exercises look like, communicate all this in advance, just to provide this transparency and support. And being transparent in this way encourages applications from people who might otherwise rule themselves out. And then the next bit is lower barriers with support. This is something that we're really we started with last year, and this year we've got 19 fellows offering their time to help people prepare their applications. So we're really putting a lot of time in application support just to give people who don't have access to these networks in writing fellowship applications how this goes, to give access to people and give them some feedback. Because we often see in our selection process that it is like a trick sometimes writing a fellowship program or an application, and a few tweaks by someone can really improve these applications. So we do encourage people to use this, so it can break down the barriers, provide road mentorship, but it's really important that not everyone will reach out. So that's one thing that we're still trying to find out, that we need the people who need it the most. We sort of need to proactively offer this support, because it is quite a barrier to approach us and say, I want this support, I'm going to be matched with a fellow. Then finally, evaluate incrementally and continuously. So what we've done is sometimes you think about diversity, and I think that's really interesting working with Anita as well. Think we need to sit down for a week, we need to create a policy and an action plan and everything. But actually, with the fellowship program, one thing that we have is sort of this practical application and this running program where we can make small changes, test the impact, and then evaluate, get feedback, and if it's effective, scale it up or implement it more. For that, it's really essential that we have feedback loops with fellows, SSI staff, and external partners, and we're doing this on a continuous basis. So every year we have a full round of focus groups and feedback of fellows feeding into the fellowship program how we can improve. So it's not something like we go to sit together for a week and then we sorted everything, but it's something that we're continuously learning, continuously improving. And that is sort of the mindset that we have for the fellowship program. We can always do better. The primary fellowship is inclusive. And that's it. Thank you.
Want to take any questions now?
Yeah, if there are any questions. Hi.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned that you got like the fellows idea, so like maybe the thematics, for example.
Yeah.
Because I found that super interesting. Are you planning like to like open that conversation like to I don't know, unsuccessful applicants or just the broader community seeing that I don't know, like it's such a great idea. I was like, where did it come from? And then I tell us, and then but maybe we're missing other steps. And
Yeah.
we'll open that conversation further.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. So what in practice that looks like is we put our eligibility criteria in a Google Doc, and then we have all our fellows just have a go at that Google Doc and see what we can improve it. It would really be interesting to open that up more broadly because we share all of that already. That's a radical transparency that we're using to get people input, because that's really the biggest challenge for the fellowship program: how to reach people that you're not reaching, who don't apply, and that issue, because that is one of the things why we're measuring and looking at representation of fellowship program, because it shows us where there are gaps, and then we can try and reach out to them.
That's what I was saying, because you're mentioning already, and the type of your fellow. Of course, that is already biased, so that's why I was saying let's do open.
Yeah, no, but I think that's where that radical transparency. I think I am very happy to just literally put that open on wherever and whoever wants to comment on it, make changes, and that would be used. That's a good suggestion. And this shows what does also, like, within the fellowship program, we're really keen on change and suggestions. So if you are not part of the SSO, I don't think you have any ideas, please come and talk to me. We're very happy for you.
Okay. Oscar, Aman had a question, but he's going to put it in Slido.
Okay.
Asking everybody to please use Slido to ask questions.
Yeah. How do you protect against bad actors? Edit things. I wouldn't say bad actors, because the fellows are very nice. It's a very warm and welcoming community. But there is one challenge, I think I'll phrase it slightly, that there is a bias within a fellowship program. And how do you make sure you don't continue that bias? So in our selection processes as well, how do you avoid that people, because the selection process we use, fellows choose fellows. So existing fellows choose the next cohort of fellows. And then it's very important to be aware that you want to avoid those fellows choosing people who are like that, really. So that is one of the challenges. And I think what we're going to implement, and that's what we're going to work on over the next year, is some unconscious bias training, for example. Just literally for our reviewers going into the review process, these are some things you need to be aware of, raise that awareness of how these decisions impact the perception of assessment of threats. Do I have more time?
We want to move on, but is that just a quick number you need to give?
For people that, yeah, so we do have about 3 to 4 fellows that we can support internationally, and internationally means sort of from it's a cost thing, really. So if your flight ticket is within a reason of a train ticket in the UK, but we do really are keen on bringing outside perspectives in, and one of the things in terms of language that we really changed as well in our criteria. Before it was like, how does the UK research environment, how do you, it was almost like hierarchical, that the UK has all the answers and we're pushing them out to these communities. We've changed the language now to say that how can UK research also benefit from the unique perspective. So we really want that collaboration and that conversation to be equal, like partners, not how do you export best practices from the UK, or you know, how do you make sure we do get the stuff out? Okay. I'm happy to talk about it anything about. We'll move on. I am at the SSI stall most of the breaks and most of the time. If you want to have a question about this,
Suggest in response to the question that was up there.
yeah.
Do you want to put something in the Slack about maybe trying to gather all the SSI fellows who are here at the stand at a particular time of the breaks, and then everybody's in person and need to talk to us, know that we're all there.
The photo, we are taking.
Oh, I meant that. Right.
Yeah, so we are taking the photo, you can see. So there will be a lot of fellows here hiding in plain sight. Deb is one, Amanda's one there, and I see them. So there are a lot of people here. On our website, there is a how to become a fellow. There's this application support, which I showed. There's 19 fellows, and there are lots more people. And you can really just email us, and we'll let you know. Thank you.
Okay, so we have one last activity for you. And that's an exercise of looking at improving inclusivity in your institute. So you put two scenarios on your table. So split your table in two in a way that works in a physically practical way. The two scenarios come from our research, but they don't come from just one participant. So they're composite scenarios from evidence we've seen in our participants that we've also seen selected in the literature. So if you were a participant in our research, you might look at one and think, that's me, that's me. It might well be examples of your experiences, but it's examples of many other experiences. You also might look at it and think, well, that's me, but they've got that wrong. And that's actually because it's a composite. It's the commonly found experiences that come together. And again, we ask you not to identify yourself. Let's start with Maria. So Maria is a second year PhD student. She's self-taught in Python. And written software to process instrumentation data for her lab. But she lacks confidence because of the way people have spoken to her, behaviours towards her. She has no peer or expert software support and has struggled to access the lab equipment. That's a very sort of short summary. So I think we start, this table was number one, wasn't it? And there was a question around what is needed within this institute to support software development for labs. Thinking about the institute, I don't know whether it was it.
Yeah, we've got Maria.
Want to some ideas.
Well, I guess coming from what we already have in place at Exeter, like we already have coding for reproducible research that gives training and kind of almost links up support and expertise for coding in labs. And then the start of a research coding community aimed to reach out to the academics and everyone. Not really working yet. What was it? What you did? So I guess so again in our group, what we're starting is us as RSEs, we get 20% non-recovered non-cost recovery time, which is half self-development but half team initiatives, one of which is which is very confusing. We're just starting on it. But essentially it's put good karma in, you get good karma back. And some of it is providing mentoring, technical mentoring support to people like PhD students, or like no funding, or just try and create this sort of thing for you. And just open up those connections a bit more.
Yeah.
Bigger visibility for our group in the first place. But if the institute doesn't have a well-established group in the first place, then that's quite challenging.
Yeah. So you're bringing good examples of good practice. So what I want to pick out is what the institute provides. I think it's often, isn't it? It's rather than putting the onus on Maria to upskill herself in some way. It's what is the institute doing? So is the institute providing, talks about community and training. But also, where does the responsibility lie? Should it lie with Maria? Should it lie with the PI? Should it lie with the faculty? I think there's some, interesting discussions in terms of who knows about this and who has to go and see them as well. But thank you. So, number 2. Oh, there was another number 1 somewhere as well. I can't remember which table I said was to look at number 1. Would anybody else like to add to number 1 or the online?
We mostly discussed that.
Is there somebody else like to add to number 1? We'll move on to number 2. I remember this group. Someone to number 2.
Yeah. So it's important to achieve this kind of career path. I think we had an idea about the economy is pretty big, but broader than all that need to change. It's kind of like next best thing, having kind of like interdepartmental or institutional support groups, and opening those up so that if you are trapped in that kind of support environment, you can reach out and find other people in other places that can take it. We could talk about mentoring team. That's kind of what it is. Another thing about the whole scenario in which the class equipment has been kind of gate kept by people together with psychology, anything like that should have a formal process in place. It shouldn't be down to any individuals. Whatever. It's not way to do with all these things.
Yeah, I really like that. That's again, you're thinking about what does the institution as a platform provide, and they need to provide transparency, information, and access standardly. So again, you're putting the responsibility up rather than on Maria. If there's an mentorship program and things like that are for the individual, that's more looking at structural change. Yeah, thank you. Who was we doing number 3? Were you doing number 3?
Yes, so we discussed that onboarding process is needed, so people can have access and actually use like the lab. And then we will both have like good documentation on the one hand, and also like that the access for example a scheduler should be like open for everyone. So okay. And Aaron shared some good practices in this institution about there's a club for people interested in using labs, so creating a encouraging that a group of practices created, so people can like share knowledge more horizontally.
So yeah, nice mix of teams building and also looking at processing practices about things to that. Yeah. And of course it's doing those there's this history of Friday night science club, and that's where everything was so on. But who can go to Friday night science club? So these lab clubs have to be accessible and inclusive. What would you like to add to Maria's scenario? You just discuss Maria? Somewhat. Is there anything you'd like to add somewhat?
I guess there's an institutionalized problem that needs to be sorted out at a high level.
Yeah, great. And did you talk around what that might look like, or who you might want to talk to about this? That's often who would you want to get around the table?
For me, it was like, okay, the obvious cliche answers, but again, not everyone might be familiar with that. In the sense, for the classic problems we face around, we need better support, or like more funding for that Maria and her colleagues around her to share the work, and it's not all on her. Then I think said, like, you should get your supervisor fired. It's just not right. Yeah, don't be a bad person looking at things. But yeah, in a more practical sense, I guess. Here, providing more support and again approaching the problem from more of a structural problem than like, oh, if we have another postdoc for 6 months, she'll be okay with 6 months. So like the temporary fixes that we have. But yeah, I would imagine that just if we have more support funding, then look at also training and look at infrastructure from different angles. That's what we need to.
Yeah. A nice summary of what we've heard. I also thought about acknowledging Maria for her work. Should she be remunerated for this almost extra RSE work that she's doing? Should she have a contract? Should she have a job title to go with it? Could that be standard within the institute and structural changes? Let's move on. So Ines, she's in her first RSE role after several years in industry. She's had a career break. She had quite a difficult time in industry, and that's left her with some concern about walking into a new setting. What will this be like? So, did you discuss Ines on your table? Yeah, did you look at a particular question?
Yeah, I think more people to maybe give me a strict question too.
Yeah, please do.
I mean, one of the things, just having training that makes people aware that these things exist can go a long way. Simply by telling one or two stories about how this has impacted one person can make people think, which I guess can help with unintentional microaggression or that sort of thing, but maybe not if it was intentional.
Yeah. So that's kind of speaking to that kind of well-intentioned but maybe ill-informed group, inviting them to sort of learn more about experiences in RSE. Yeah, great, thank you. It's your table that you discussed.
We talked about practices of her colleagues repeating and supporting her ideas and attributing them correctly to counteract some of those experiences she's had previously of being talked over or overlooked, as well as having line managers who had mental first aider certifications, or making clear that they are safe people to talk to if she experiences any of these kinds of behaviors in her new role.
Yeah, great. So that's about creating a safe enough space. And then the first one was more about processes and practices and acknowledging contributions in academia and formal processes for that. So we don't get lost in sort of informal work allocation and recognition, which I think we do have an issue with in academia. I think Simon spoke to that. Anybody else? What did you discuss online?
We mostly looked at question 2 here, and we discussed one thing that's often, in code of conduct violations or in the office when there's sort of breaches of professional standards. There's often a lot of onus on the person affected to file a complaint, and I mentioned in a previous role where one of the people I was line managing for experienced some misogyny, and as a line manager, with the support of another line manager, we just said, okay, we are gonna on this, whether or not you file a complaint or not. So because we find that's a violation of professional standards, so that takes away the onus on the person, because often in event settings, you've got the code of conduct committee sort of leaning over to that person saying, are you going to file a complaint? And they really want to hear, no, it's fine, or and there's a lot of barrier to say yes. So if you take away that sort of trigger to act on it away from the person affected, and you just observe that there is a breach of the code violation, then your relationship with the person affected is more caring. So you can more focus on that person. Are you okay? Give them support, and that changes that relationship as well. There is one point that was mentioned online in those kinds of situations where you work within very small teams. So you might not have a line manager or a manager. That might be the person who's doing it. Or if you file a complaint, in your HR department that might affect your career as well. So you get sort of a blank stamp, like, oh, that person is difficult or something. You know, that's a real worry as well.
I think what you're talking very strongly there about is allyship, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not putting the burden on the person who's experiencing the discrimination, but it's somebody else from a position of strength taking that in.
So this is from conversations with other women that have had career breaks from maternity leave or adoption leave, and it's very dependent your return. I mean, I know this, she's had a career break, but we decided that we thought managers should have career break training as how to integrate people back into teams.
Yeah.
Because people are often like, oh, well, your work has already been allocated, and what are you going to do now? And there's just if someone's never experienced someone having a career break, they don't know how to integrate them back in, and it's not their fault really. They just need some support.
So training the managers there so that they can support the people coming back in from career break.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to finish there. Because it's really important for us as an inclusive RSE team and the SSI to be working with the RSE community, we'd really like to know how this session went, because we'll want to involve people in the future. So if you do have the time and the patience to do a feedback form, we'd really appreciate you do that. So you can let us know what your takeaways were. Share some things that work for you or anything that you would have liked to have been done differently. The other thing is that people have pointed out, and Ella has asked me to kind of highlight this point, that you're self-selecting coming into this room, and you may come into this room because you have a marginalized identity, you're from an underrepresented group, you've experienced or witnessed discrimination in an overt or covert way. And we are working with you to find a solution. And what we actually need to do, and there's a lot of you were pulling that out in that last session, we need to work with the people who have the influence to have really sort of the people with the power that are in the hierarchies. I don't know, that might be you, I don't know, and it's great if you're here, to make changes that shift systems and culture, rather than put, the burden on the people experiencing the discrimination to do the report and the support, or go and find the training, or try and seek community, or go to a mindfulness session or a resilience session. We want to remove the barriers rather than people having to do extra work to overcome them. And we hope that to be part of the inclusive RSE project. And that's one of the last stages Jasmine talked about, is actually working with people in senior leadership roles who can influence policy, so that we can try and enact change. So that is one of our aims.
Yeah, so often at conferences there's like the diversity session or the EDIA panel, and people come and they have the same chats and the same events and so rants, and it doesn't feel like things necessarily change, but we really are trying to change things. So thank you.
And also you can get in touch with any of us if you have any questions or comments or want to discuss anything further.
Can I add something? So there's really good training on that by OLS, allyship, and they have allyship training, they run regularly, and it's something we're offering to all our fellows, mentors and all our fellows. They can attend these sessions with.
I think the next one is on 1st October.
Yes.
1st October. Yeah. So
Have a look at that. Already want to know more about that?
Great, thank you very much everybody for your time, your effort, your energy, your thoughts. I think these sessions can be somewhat energizing and somewhat tiring at the same time. So we really appreciate you coming along and engaging with the various aspects of inclusivity in the SSI project. Thank you very much.